morning. My name is John McRitchie. I'm the Regional Director with the Ontario Centres of Excellence here in Toronto for Central Ontario. First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody back for the second day of Discovery and acknowledge our sponsor for this theatre, Gallings, who've been generous enough to provide the support that helps to enable the whole Conference of Discovery. Yesterday, I was a mentor at what's now officially the world's largest business mentoring event here at Discovery. And I'll have to say the question that I got most often from people was, how do I find more customers? And really when somebody asks that, whether they're just planning a business or they've got a business or they're starting out, really that generates a whole lot of other questions. Where do I go looking for customers? What do those customers pay? Will they buy what I have? Who else are they buying from? And all of those sort of questions that really ends up having people then turn around and start knocking on doors saying, well, I need some money to go hire a consultant to do market research. Well, you really don't need to do that these days. There's a lot of other options that you have out there that can help you answer those questions up front, and there's a lot you can do. And the great power of doing it yourself is that you get a much stronger feel for your business and for the opportunity than you ever can if you hire somebody else to do it for you. So this morning, I'm pleased to introduce David Teten, who's here with us to tell us some of the secrets of how to do this and how you can do it and leverage a lot of the materials that are out there very inexpensively and very quickly to answer a lot of those questions. David comes to us this morning from New York, where he's the where he's been a serial entrepreneur. He's a partner with FF Venture Capital. He's been the founder and CEO of several companies in his past, and serial entrepreneur. And his past to start, in his bio, he mentions that he has also learned his programming on the Atari 800 series computer, which tells me that he's probably a little bit older than he looks. This morning, I'd like you to join me in welcoming David Teten, who will walk us through this interesting presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I know pretty much what I'm going to say. I know most of the jokes I'm going to tell. So I'm not that interested in hearing myself talk. Feel free to come up to the microphone with any questions you have, and I'll try and take them as I go along. So I'm going to be discussing market research, but let me define market research broadly as the process of figuring out what business you should be investing in. And by invest, I don't mean just money. I mean your time, your energy, your life. And in particular, I'm going to be focusing on how to do it free. As you probably know, Google is setting up microphones globally to tape record every single conversation any of us have anywhere. And that means that we have to search engine optimize all of our language. So I have to put the word free in bold italics throughout the presentation so that today's presentation shows up high in Google search results. So that's why you'll hear the word free a lot. You can download the slides from the presentation at teten.com/market-research, so no need to take notes or even pay attention. So I'll briefly talk about some of the tools that you can use for market research, talk about how to identify potential customers, and some ways to use social media for reaching out to appropriate people. And I think this is particularly pertinent to Canadian entrepreneurs, given a lot of your target market for people who have North American ambitions are going to be outside of the country. There are ways to get around that geographic barrier. I published a year and a half ago the first research study on best practices in deal origination for private equity and VC funds. And one of the striking findings was how many investments professional investors like myself look at before they invest in a company. They're investing typically in 1 out of 100 companies. And remember, these are professional investors, so they have a diversified portfolio. You as an entrepreneur have an undiversified portfolio. You can only do one company at a time. But for those who are entrepreneurs in the room, how many people here have looked at 3 business ideas before choosing a business? 5. 7. So, in other words, you are taking a higher risk by applying a lower selection filter, and yet you're more vulnerable, right? Because you have a totally undiversified basket of investment opportunities. That's a mistake. You should be evaluating dozens of business ideas, and even once you say, okay, I'm going to build X, then, of course, you need to listen to the market and probably pivot 3 times before you get into a real business. A startup is not a company. A startup is a group of people in search of a business model on which they can build a company. So it's really important to cast your net wide, just like professional investors do. Little background on our firm. So I'm a partner at FF Venture Capital. We're the third most active seed stage fund in the US and Western Europe. We have 2 investments in Canada, which I'll get to momentarily. We're also fortunate to be one of the top performing funds in the country with a gross IRR north of 40% since 1999. I've listed here our major investments. In Canada in particular, we have some very, very interesting companies. We led the seed round in 500 picks, which is what Flickr would have been if Flickr hadn't been bought by a bunch of Americans. And the CEO of Flickr of 500 picks is going to be around here a little later today. So beautiful, beautiful website of photos, and they're really performing amazingly. I don't want to talk about the metrics, but we're very happy with that investment. Interaxon, which has a booth right down the hall, is the future. Interaxon makes EEG headsets which read your mind, literally. So you stick it on your head and can tell, are you concentrating, are you not focused? There are all sorts of interesting applications of that. The way we see it is keyboards are purely a fad. Eventually, it's going to come from your mind. The only question is, will Interaxon figure it out or someone else? We're betting on Interaxon. Both these companies are based about 5 minutes from here. So let me define market research. Market research is a systematic, objective collection and analysis of data about a particular target market, competition, or environment. Notice the second part of the definition, which is the collection of data. A lot of people, they do their market research sort of by introspection. You know, I'm a 21-year-old male, and I really like a product that would help me find the best party on Saturday night. You'd be amazed at how many people pitch companies to us to address that use case. Well, that's a pretty narrow use case relative to the total market of people out there. And it's much more useful to actually talk with real customers other than yourself because, of course, you're biased, right? Your baby's always beautiful. I have news for you. Babies are red, wrinkled, and really kind of messy, and they all are. And you need to talk with other people, be more honest about what your baby really looks like. So this graph is a summary of why the more obscure opportunities are more valuable. Here at this conference, I met someone who's working on an app that helps you meet the right people at a conference, and someone who has an app that will help you meet people you can play sports with. And literally, I've seen dozens and dozens of these companies. Why? Because the opportunity there is very obvious. So therefore, some entrepreneur says, oh, this is my use case. I'm going to build for it. But the problem is, from day one, he has dozens of competitors. The more subtle ideas are the ones where you're going to have fewer competitors and where you're more likely to build an interesting business. So you want to be in the upper left of this graph, where there are fewer competitors, customers are going to pay higher prices, and the information about the opportunity is private. It's undisclosed. That, of course, means you need to work a little harder to get information. So start us with some tools. These are some Google search hacks. So first step of almost everyone is you go into Google and you type in your industry and see what's going on. If you append some of these terms that I've listed here, you'll get much richer data about the industry because you'll get research reports of various sorts. You can get full books. You can search other people's hard drives. I once typed in the name of one of my competitors in a prior business I ran, and I got an in-depth analysis of their competitive position, including all their financials, prepared by a team of MBAs who had foolishly left it on the public internet, right? So that was useful information for me to know how they viewed their competition. There are also a whole host of research databases out there that you can get for free at public libraries. If you are a student or you are friendly with a student, you get it for free. So I'd certainly recommend going there to pull out some data. If you want access to Wall Street research, what the public companies in your space are doing, what their projections for revenues are, get a Charles Schwab account. I don't know what the Canadian equivalent is. And you can get access to all the major Wall Street research providers for your $100 Charles Schwab account. So that's another useful source of information. The research on how students look for information today show very clearly that they tend to think that Google is the be-all and end-all, the repository of all information. This is not actually correct. There are many niche search sites out there that will get you better information. I've listed here some in particular that have useful archives of information. So SlideShare, where a lot of my material is posted, is great for preparing presentations, pitch decks to investors, for example. I've listed some others. And I'd certainly recommend you go to each of these and see what's out there in your particular domain. In particular, the public internet is cluttered with a lot of effectively chunks of analysis, and these sort of sites tend to get the more in-depth analysis, a study of the chestnut industry in Canada. Someone out there has written a 50-page report, probably the people right around the corner, and you want to get a copy of that if you're doing a business related to the chestnut industry in Canada. Another very common mistake I see entrepreneurs make is insufficient competitive analysis. Your competitors, by definition, are ahead of you, right, if you're a startup, because they've been around and you're not. So they are effectively another group of parallel scientific experiments of people in search of a business model. So it is well worth your time to look at every single competitor, evaluate their product line and their go-to-market strategy, because why should you pay for your own experiment? Let them pay for their experiment, and copy for them as appropriate. This week's Economist actually has a piece on precisely that point, that innovation is overrated. Most successful businesses are copies, right? So Facebook, that was a copy of the Square and Friendster and lots of predecessors. Facebook did it better, and they did a lot of other things that were smart, and that's why they're successful, and the predecessors were not. So there's absolutely no shame. It is a virtue to copy from others and learn from them and make new and creative mistakes instead of the old, embarrassing mistakes that other people have already made before you. I've also listed here some social media monitoring tools. And there are a couple of things you can use these for. One is, of course, monitor your company, your name, your competition. Another is looking at problem statements. So if you see a lot of people posting on Twitter or on blogs that they have such and such problem, that's an indication that there's a market there. It's also a sign that you should perhaps reach out to them and interview them and say, I'm building something to address your use case. Can we talk? So here's an example. If you go to Social Mention and you type in 500 pics, you can see data here on the passion that people have about it, sentiment, positive or negative, that folks have about it. The search terms, if you look in the lower left, you'll see the keywords associated with 500 pics, photo, picture, add-on. I'm not sure why add-on is there, but that's something they should look into because there's a pattern that people care about add-ons. And there's a lot more sophisticated analysis you can do on top of this. Another very valuable tool is interns. So I've always had interns working for me. We're looking for one undergrad intern this summer, by the way, if you know anyone who wants to apply. And the right interns are gold. The wrong interns are a tremendous suck of time and energy. So the question is, how do you get the best interns? So the first lever you have, because you probably don't have much money to pay them, is prestige, right? So your company, by definition, has no prestige because it's new. But maybe you have a good background because you went to a great school or you worked for a great firm. Maybe you have investors who add some cachet. So you want to lever that. And all my ads would mention those credentials because no one, by definition, had heard of my startup, but they might have heard of a prior employer I had or some of the other people associated with my startup. The next is advertise explicitly that you're going to open doors. So in my ads for interns, I would say things like, we have a history of getting our interns jobs at JP Morgan and McKinsey, other firms that they had heard of, which was true. And that helped to get people more excited about working with us. Third is education. Emphasize that you're going to take seriously your responsibility to educate them about the industry and about the startup process. And fourth is promise substantive experience. The very smart, ambitious, capable 20-year-old can do amazing things, but it's only that top 5%, right? The bottom 95%, again, will detract time and energy. So I would always focus my efforts on getting the top 5% in order to get folks to whom I could meaningfully delegate, and then it was worth my time to spend the energy with them. And the last trick is target marketing. So in one of my prior businesses, we needed some interns, and we reached out to the Chinese club at the local university and said, we're looking for interns, and we value Chinese language skills. Then we reached out to the debate society. We said, we value debate experience because the job involves a lot of communication. Then we reached out to the political group. We said, you'll learn about real-world politics. And this was all true, right? But you know, Chinese language skills were probably number 10 on the list of priorities. But this was target marketing, which always beats bulk marketing. Relatively few students will pay attention to your ad when you post it on the central job board. But the students who are on the debate club mailing list, they all read those emails, and almost no one else thinks to advertise to that group about a job opening. So you have no competition. And I like situations with no competition. So how do you see real customers instead of looking in your navel and your brain at what you think about your baby? So the best approach is find the real customers and observe them in action as unobtrusively as possible. So the formal way to do that is you set them up in a lab and you go behind a window and watch them. There are other ways to do that. You also want to spend significant time with them. The ideal customer is someone who has recently done a thorough evaluation of all products to address a particular problem and can tell you they're all bad, they're all lacking certain functionality, here's what I really want. That is for a product that addresses a known need. A lot of very successful startups address unknown needs. Who knew we all needed an iPad? But that approach can work well for products that are addressing a relatively apparent need. Another very helpful tactic is what we call snowball sampling. That means if you find one customer or potential customer who can give you insight, ask for a lot of referrals, because that, say, CTO of a real estate company will know other CTOs of real estate companies who can give you insight into what their particular needs are if that's the market that you're addressing. A very, very powerful tactic is polling. But the challenge in polling is getting respondents. So here's the way to get respondents in almost all cases, is run some ads on Google AdWords. So advertise your product and make the ad go to a splash page saying, launching soon, submit your email. And spend $100 and see how many people submit, how many people click on your ad. If no one clicks on your ad, there's no market for your product, right? And that costs you zero because no one clicked on your ad, right? So it's effectively free market research. Free, boldface, italic. So I would recommend run a lot of different permutations of the product that you're trying to build, the service you're trying to build, with different splash pages, and see what gets the most hits. That's the one that you want to focus on and build, because the market has told you that that's the reality of what they want. If you have a group of people to whom you can poll, so your target market is college students, you can mail your fraternity to get respondents, fine, so use Google Docs, free, and survey them. But it's always better to watch behavior as opposed to what they say. That's why I like the Google AdWords technique, because that's behavior from people who have no social ties to you, right? So they're more likely to be honest with you and say, your baby is really ugly, even by the standards of red, wrinkled, wet babies, really ugly. And you should think about different babies. So next I'll talk about signals of potential customers. And actually some of my thinking here comes from a gentleman in Canada wrote a book called Shift Selling. And the thesis of shift selling is that the best time to sell a car to someone is when they just had an accident and the car broke and they need a new car. If their car is fine, you can't sell them a car, right? Doesn't matter how good a salesperson you are and how wonderful your car is, they don't need a car. So you want to look for signals that someone needs a car, and then you can be an inferior car salesperson, and you'll still be able to sell the car. So what are some signals that indicate market receptivity to your product? So I'll talk about a few. So this is a market map of the social networking business in mid-2005. Very, very simplified. So at the time, there were business-oriented social networks like LinkedIn and Zing. There are dating-oriented ones like Match and Plenty of Fish. And there are more social ones like Facebook and MySpace. And across the bottom axis, I've listed geography. And in Europe, there wasn't a leader in a social network. So some entrepreneurs in Germany said, OK, let's rip off Facebook, right down to saying view source in the browser and copying the code, and let's create StudiVZ. And that generated, I think, a $100 million exit in 2 years. It was a direct copy. They saw that there was a market niche by doing this market map. So market map is a very powerful way to identify market opportunities. And actually, I'll jump to the next slide. So the most common way to think about this is the graph of geography versus channel. And so I've met a number of people this week who are building the Canadian equivalent of X. And that's fine. That's legitimate. Although the problem with that is, of course, that implies that your total market is Canada, which is a lot less interesting to a VC than my total market is the world, or at least North America. But it's legit for building a nice, modest-sized business. I've listed here some other market maps to think about, like quality versus distribution channel. I can't tell you in advance what the right market map is for your area, and maybe it's a 3D or 4D market map. But it's a very good exercise to go through the different matrices and fill in the holes and see where there are opportunities. Going back, so here is a step-by-step approach of how Clout, which is one of our top performing portfolio companies, not Canadian, regrettably, how they thought about their market. And as I said, you can download this on my website, so I'm certainly not going to read it. But what happened was Joe Fernandez, the CEO, saw that social media was increasingly important and that people were living more of their lives online, and thought that people would want a quantifiable metric of how influential they were online, and created Clout.com, K-L-O-U-T, as a vehicle to measure that. And that company, which we led the seed round in, recently raised a round at the $200 million ballpark level. So he first thought big level, what is the societal change? And then thought a little smaller, what's the implication, right? What needs to be created in this world? With any startup that comes to me, one of the questions I ask is, why is this going to work today when it wouldn't work in the past? Facebook is a great example, right? There are lots of people who tried social networks in the past. Facebook hit the sweet spot where the technology is available to scale the business quickly, where people wanted to be online, and of course they did an amazing job on the engineering side. They hit that spot. Same thing with Groupon. Lots of people tried the Groupon model and failed until Groupon had the timing right. So we want to see what technologies have changed or something has changed. Maybe it's a regulatory change such that your business is going to be successful. Another way to look for signals is what traffic are different terms getting. Google conveniently gives you this data for free. So Google the phrase Google AdWords keyword tool and type in something like chestnuts in Canada, and you'll see how many people care about this topic. And that will indicate more about your market. Athletic teammates Toronto, right? How many people care about that topic? That's what people who SEO consultants do to figure out how to word your website. But you can use this exact same tool as an entrepreneur to identify what people have a demand for. I would do that, think about this down to the level of the phrasing people use to describe their problem, which of course should inform the name of your company and the language on your website. So for a lot of products that people and services that people in the internet sector in particular are developing, they want to sell to young growth companies because they usually don't have infrastructure, so it's easier to sell to them than big companies. They usually also make faster sales decisions. So the question is, how do you identify them? So I would recommend in your sector, monitor the major news feeds about VC funding, see who got funding. Those are the companies that are going to have cash in the bank and don't have infrastructure, so they need your service. It doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, you're a recruiter, you're a consultant. These are the people who need your services if you're a professional service provider. In addition, they need business tools and services like a new CRM system or a new phone system, whatever it is that you're building. So I think that's a good way to identify customers who, to use the analogy I used earlier, their car has gone through a status change and they need a new car. Any questions so far? So let me talk about your firm's corporate network. We have a lot of engineers here, so we have to have some math in our presentation. So this is a formula to summarize your corporate and personal social network that you're going to use today for information gathering, but in the longer run, this is going to be your sales pipeline and your funding pipeline, and will generate a lot of other resources for you. So I'm going to go through each of the components here, and I need a volunteer. So is there a startup here who can volunteer? Some courageous soul? Yes, sir. What's your name and what's your business? Can you go to the mic?
My name is Pavel. The startup is called Web Monocle, and we're at a stage where we're going to market right now.
What do you do?
We do productivity for small businesses, or businesses in general.
That.
So it's a software tool that any person can install on their computers in a few minutes. It's instead of blocking websites or spying on employees, it gives them a proactive choice, work or personal, and then sends out weekly reports to managers and to employees themselves to keep them accountable online.
Got it. So it's sort of like rescue time.
In a way, yes.
OK, thank you. So we're going to talk about Pavel's business, Web Monocle, you said?
Yes.
OK, and how we can think about getting information about the market desire for this product. So first is character. So he needs to connect with people who are going to trust him to use the information appropriately in a non-competitive manner. So if you want, here for example is a dump from zoominfo.com of Doug Cooper as a speaker at this conference. And you can use this as a vehicle to find people who have affinities with you. So for example, let's look at Doug. You see that he's a member of Communitech's board and the board of the Information Technology Association of Canada. So if you want to network into him to try and get his time to pitch him on using your service, that gives you some axes in to get to him, because he's a busy guy, right? If you cold call him, you're not going to be successful. So you can use that to enhance your odds that he's going to be responsive to you when you say, can I have a few minutes of your time to learn what does Intel today do to track employee productivity? The next issue is competence. Who's going to be competent to answer Pavel's question about best practices in this area? So the best people to talk with are ex-employees. You as a startup, by definition, are going to be recruiting if you are at all successful, right? Who do you want to recruit? People who worked in your industry. So reach out to people who worked for your competitors. Preferably they left them so that you're not raising obvious conflict of interest issues. But it's absolutely legitimate to reach out and say, I see you used to work for Rescue Time and you left and you're doing something else. How would you like to take a senior role in my startup? And let me tell you what I'm doing. Do not worry. This is #1 most common entrepreneurial mistake. Do not worry about sharing your secret sauce. I promise the people at Rescue Time have thought about everything you've thought about more, because they have more resources and they've been in it longer and they've gotten more customer feedback than you have. So I would open the kimono, explain what you're doing. Maybe they join your company, maybe not. But either way, you're going to learn a lot about your business. Another tool is services like bestvendor.com. It's a New York startup. So Best Vendor is a tool that identifies the most popular vendors in different categories. So you go on and you say, I'm a startup and I'm using Basecamp for project management and I use Salesforce for my CRM. And in exchange for you providing that data, they will give back to you the data about what your peers are using. So that will tell you more about your direct competitors who are most comparable to you. The next variable is the relevance. Who's most relevant to you? So my strategy has always been, I don't want to go to people and ask them favors. I want them to come to me. So the strategy for that is to organize a meetup or a program, maybe leveraging your alumni organization, if you went to a local university, and do it on, say, employee productivity, how to boost it. Then you'll get 100 people in the room who care about employee productivity. You'll probably get the head of HR for Intel, right? Who'll show up because that's part of his or her job. And you could say, I'm working on this company called Web Monocle. Here's what we do. Love to talk with you about what we're doing. So you've created a mini conference around your area of interest, and you're the leader of the conference. So I think that's a very effective tool. So the next variable is strength. How strong is the relationship with people that you have? So to quantify this, think about it as, what are the odds this person will return my phone call when I call Doug Cooper and say, hey, can I have a few minutes of your time, right? So one lever is affinity. I mentioned earlier, if you're involved with Communitech and he's on the board, you can get an intro through there. Another is information. So if you contact the head of HR for Intel Canada and you say, I am researching how to boost employee productivity and building a software solution to address this, and I've done a lot of research, can I have some of your time? The head of HR will probably want to talk with you because you have value-added information to provide. So it's not just a one-way street where they're opening their kimono and sharing lots of data. You're opening your kimono and sharing what you've learned so that the head of HR can do a better job managing her human capital. Third is others' credibility. If you can say, I've already spoken with the head of HR at Microsoft Canada and Bell Canada, whatever. So that says other serious people are giving you time and you've probably absorbed some useful information from them. I should give you useful information too. And the last strategy is ego boost. So it's not effective when you call the head of HR and say, I'm talking about, I'm doing research on how to manage companies, right? That's extremely vague. And if you say, I'm reaching out to all the 100 biggest companies in Canada, not effective. The better strategy is as follows. You say, I saw that Intel won an award as one of the best places to work in Canada, and I saw that you were the person who received the award. I'd love to talk with you about that award because you obviously have domain expertise, and I'm trying to develop a solution to make sure you get that award next year. That reads like an email that's targeted as opposed to an email that's spam. And targeted emails always outperform spam emails. It's absolutely worth the extra effort to do the research on your target such they respond to your email. I've actually gotten very good results sending cold emails if and only if I highly customized it where the subject line and the body of the email shows very clearly I invested some effort in doing background on the person before I reached out to them. Another way of building strength is, of course, to meet people face to face. So Meetup is an amazing platform for this. In New York, we have a super active Meetup culture. So I went on to Meetup, and I looked in Toronto, and there's an HTML5 Toronto Web Developers Meetup. 943 members, no upcoming meetings. So I would reach out to the head of this Meetup and say, I want to organize a Meetup, and I'm going to do a presentation about my company and our development cycle, and I'll find the venue and help make it happen. You'll get 943 developers, right? For those of you who are recruiting, that's a pretty good audience, I think. And you're going to be the center of the action. If there's no meetup around, say, workplace productivity in Toronto, create one of your own, right? It's free, or $70 a year, whatever. And you're going to get the people who care about this topic. Next variable is information. One of my standard job interview questions for anyone in an outward-facing role is how many people are in your contact management system and what do you use? So I'll tell you the wrong answers, the answers that won't get you a job. Any small number, small meaning a couple hundred, and any answer that's not electronic and not a real CRM system. And I interview people, or salespeople, give me answers like, 200, and I keep an Excel file, ding, right? No job. Because if you're a salesperson, your whole job is to have a lot of relationships and be able to convert them into revenues. End of story. And you need to have some systematic way of tracking all those people so that you can reach out to them effectively when the occasion demands. So from day one of your startup, actually day -500, because you should have been doing this for years, you should be tracking all the people you meet, track where they work, their interest in your subject area, and make sure it's recorded in some standardized way. Take a look at Jigsaw to fill in data that's missing your database. Hashable, which is a portfolio company, has some interesting technology to clean up your CRM system. A lot of others. But the key point is have the data and leverage it. So the penultimate variable in your network is the number of people in your network. So one tool that people underuse is gated online communities. There are a number of, the way I see it is online socializing, the way people interact online, is steadily mirroring more and more the way that people interact face-to-face. So the way people interact face-to-face, as they get more senior, they get to be decision makers, they want fences around them. They join private country clubs, and they live in gated communities. That's just the way the world works. And the same thing is happening online. So I've listed here a few gated online communities, like inmobile.org, which is for VP level and above people in the wireless industry, or the IARG Online, which I'm a member of, which is for international executives with, who have 5 years or more background abroad. You have to be interviewed to get into it. And within these communities, you can blast out an email saying, I'm working on this product, would love to talk with people who have insight into it. I'm looking to hire someone like this, can anyone help me? And because it's a gated community, there's higher trust, and you're dealing with higher level people. So just Groucho Marx said he wouldn't join any club that would have him as a member. So I would suggest you join the club that you can just barely squeak into, and then try and leverage that club. You can find all sorts of other interesting gated communities on LinkedIn and Ning and Zing and so on, and I would certainly look for those in order to find people who are going to be responsive to your email. This also applies to investors. Whether you're looking for capital or you're selling a product that investors know about, I should particularly want to highlight the left column here. There are a number of very active online communities for early stage private companies, like Gus.com and Angel.co. Go there and look for your competitors, right? They have very conveniently provided their information online. So you should be using that as a competitive research tool while keeping in compliance with the terms and conditions on the website. So that is a no-brainer to me, is try and see what all the other scientific experiments in your market are doing so that you can learn from them. Last variable is diversity. So this sounds very politically correct, that diversity matters, but it's actually backed up by the academic research. Companies that have more diverse employee bases outperform more homogeneous companies. And more generally, in your own career, if you look at the people who rise to senior levels in companies, or people who become successful startup CEOs, as opposed to the vastly greater number of unsuccessful startup CEOs, they're people who are able to bridge multiple disciplines. They may have grown up as an engineer, but they learn to speak the language of marketing and sales and PR and all the other functions in a business. Because as you grow up and your company becomes a real company, you need to at the least manage people in those different functions. You can't do that unless you speak the language. So you develop that skill set, just like you want to learn French, you talk with French people. So you develop that skill set by interacting more with people from those functions, learning how they think, so that you can try and bring that DNA into your company. So let me concretize that in Pavel's case. So who's adjacent to him? Well, one adjacency is companies that are similar to his but targeting different market. So for example, there are a variety of salespeople productivity tools that are geared to the needs of salespeople. So I would research that market. Those folks are very sensitive to their, for example, the time they spend on phone calls. I would research what works in that market and how you could apply those lessons to your market. You can also look by personal characteristics. So in the example I gave earlier, Doug Cooper may be more senior than you, and you're more junior, but you have this affinity of perhaps you went to the same university or you have an affiliation with Communitech. You can use that as your vector in. So questions. And I'm particularly interested, by the way, in your own tips on how to do research for free, boldface italic, how you can get information. Yes, ma'am. And please come to the front. David Teten. T-E-T-E-N. That was an easy question. OK, other questions? Pavel, how are you doing market research?
For market research, we've done extensive analysis of the competitors, of the ways to go to market. So we chose channel-centric approach as opposed to selling directly. And again, did a lot of market research on the different channels we can take and ended up going with Synex for distribution. So right now, our marketing strategy is already crystallized, and we're just going to market.
OK, good. And what's your target, your initial target market?
The initial target market is small SMEs, small to medium businesses, and eventually we want to get into enterprise markets. OK, good. Thanks.
So any other advice you'd all like to share? Yes, sir. Please come to the microphone.
Yeah, this is a question. What platforms are you aware of that are sort of a level up from LinkedIn? I find that that's become somewhat commoditized, and a lot of the groups you join, it's a good 10 minutes waste of my time in the morning in a lot of those groups. I'm wondering if there are other platforms out there that you utilize yourself that you might speak to.
I'm not sure I heard you. I think your question is, what other platforms besides LinkedIn are useful, and how to identify the most value-added groups. Is that correct? OK, so I've listed here some of the other platforms for groups that I'd encourage you to look at. The second part of your question is, how do you filter? So it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that you only want to join the club that you can just barely squeak into. LinkedIn groups and all online groups tend towards a tragedy of the commons, where they get filled up with people who are looking for a job, consultants who are looking for gigs. So you need to avoid that, and the best way to avoid that is look for the groups that say gated for alumni of your school or members of such and such group, where you pay some membership fee. That's who I would want to join. And I've actually unsubscribed from almost all my groups, except for the groups that have some barrier, which tends to promote better behavior within the group. And goes back to what I was saying earlier, to quote Scoop Nisker, a radio DJ. He said, if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own. So if you can't find a group that is gated in the way you want, create one, right? Nothing stops Pavel from starting a group called Productivity Leads at large companies. Think of something a little catchier. Or Heads of HR at major companies. It will help him if he had that job title, Head of HR. But even if he doesn't, he can create such a group, get some initial people to join and evangelize to their friends. Those people are his target market, right? And if he owns the group, then it makes it much easier for him to woo them to use his service. Other questions? So, yes?
First, a tip. I've used the domain search or restricted domain search to find things. And sometimes what's worked is if you find one document, and you can, that looks like what you want, and then look at the domain or the whole URL to that document. Use that URL as to restrict the next search that you do and just more broadly search within that. And it's actually quite amazing when you've turned up sort of things that you talk about, the sort of investor presentations and things. If you find one, it's probably because there was an investor conference, and on that same directory within that file, there probably are a series of other presentations that you can find. Question I have is the flip.
Just one second. So for those who don't know how to do this, the way it works is, let's say you find that at the site rbc.com, there's a lot of good stuff. So on Google, type in site:/rbc.com, and then the search term, and Google will only search within the RBC site.
Yep.
So that's a great tip.
Yeah, you can go down further too. If it's down sub-levels within or directories within a domain, you can really restrict it right into a file folder essentially on the domain. The flip side question I had is, should you be worried about what you keep online and what you expose as you're collecting or doing your work? I mean, it's hard not to have stuff online, but should you worry about it, or should it just be something?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're actually working on an investment right now in a company that addresses this precise problem. So you should be paranoid about the information you have online. I'm actually not terribly paranoid about the competition because it's really hard for other people to successfully copy you. The proof of that, by the way, is Pavel, go call up Salesforce, go call up Oracle and say, guys, I think there's a big market for employee productivity solutions. How about you pay me to build this business for you? I want a job with you. Your odds of succeeding are de minimis, right? And that's not because Pavel's a bad guy. That's just because most other companies out there are busy with their own vision. They think they're the smartest guy in the room, and they can't learn from others. And so they're not going to copy you. That's not my concern. I would definitely worry about things like your financial privacy and identity theft. That's only going to grow in importance, and you should be very careful about any data online. Like, I don't talk about my kids or my family online because that can be used in various ways to steal their identity or in other ways to deter me. But I'm very open about my business life because I think the net positive of exposure is greater than any downside. Get closer.
I was wondering why you asked for a volunteer in the first place to come up here and speak at the microphone.
Because audience interaction boosts your audience scores. When they do the survey afterwards saying who's the best speaker, I'm competing for that,
and your name
and
is David,
I get a higher score.
And your name was David, right?
David Teten, yeah, T-E-T-E-N.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi. My question is around hiring third parties to do, market research for you, primary market research, so where they go and talk to your customers. Now, I've heard, various comments for and against it. The for is, it's a third party. People will be more honest with them. They'll tell you if your product sucks, or, and the against is, well, it's not as good as talking to your own customers and finding out what they have to say. So, what do you have to say about that?
So I came to Toronto on Sunday, and I thought briefly, I wasn't home last night. I wasn't with my wife putting the kids to sleep. And I thought briefly about hiring someone to help put the kids to sleep and kind of hear about our day. You know what? Not a good idea. This is a non-outsourceable activity. So you as a startup CEO, you have very limited funds. I mean, maybe you have lots of money. Good for you. But most startup CEOs don't. And you should be spending your money very strictly on things that are logical to outsource. You need to understand your customer, otherwise you have no business, right? You need to spend very significant time doing all the things I talked about, getting to know them. And a third-party company is inevitably going to filter the results and going to not give you as clear a picture of what's going on. Now, there's value in consultants, right, who will tell you how to do it, help you word the survey, and so on. But you need to be really involved with the process. Right? So I remember a CEO pitched me and he said, oh, I've hired someone to help me write the business plan. This is a big red flag to me, right? Like, it's a business plan. This is your guide to what you're doing. maybe have an intern help you research market size. That's fine, but you need to understand and master this because that's the guide to your whole business.
I have a few questions about researching private companies and competitors, especially in the private space, because there's not a lot of transparency in that space. So working at a startup and you're trying to learn a little bit more about your competitors, what can you do in that sense?
So I actually was working on a startup to address this exact problem prior to joining my firm. So are you talking about small private companies like startups?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, so I listed earlier some websites that are particularly helpful for this, like gust.com and angel.co, and of course the major news feeds, TechCrunch, Mashable, and so on. So you should be searching on all of those. Look at the conferences in your area and see who's speaking and who's attending. So that'll tell you what other startups are pursuing your type of issue. Look on LinkedIn for people who say they're startup CEOs and see who has a background or is working in your area. Those are all different tools. There's so much information online, you should be taking advantage of it. How many more questions can we take? Paul? One more question? Okay.
I realized I asked you your name twice already, and I haven't introduced myself.
Okay, one more question. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, the question is about recruiting. So do you have any good information regarding the market salary in a certain area for certain functionality?
Yeah, you're trying to figure out how much to pay people?
Right, yes.
So I have a slide deck on my website, teten.com/recruiting, which talks about how to recruit and all sorts of tools for comp and gives some data on typical comp. So I would look at that. There are a couple of websites like glassdoor.com and salary.com that will give you substantive data. I would also go back to the Toronto HTML5 developers meetup. In New York, that wouldn't last for a day because some recruiter would say, OK, I'm going to organize a meetup. So someone here should go contact that organizer and make that happen.
Thank you.
So as I said, you can download a slightly more detailed version of these slides on my website, teten.com/marketresearch. I'll be here for another 2 hours or so before I go meet with 500 Picks and Interaxon, who are both hiring, by the way. I appreciate you taking the time and would particularly love to hear your own ideas on how to do market research for free so that we can get comments, which boosts your search engine visibility, which is obviously important given Google's master strategy. I appreciate OC for inviting me down to present. Thank you very much.
Very much for attending, and thank you, David, for the presentation. There's a lot of good information on David's site beyond his presentation today, and a lot of good tips and tools that he's presented here. Again, I'd like to thank you for attending and acknowledge again Gallings for their generous support that helps this theater and helps discovery happen. Enjoy the rest of your day.